Good morning, or afternoon, I should say. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. We're excited to have so many of you join us from across the country. On behalf of the U.S. Department of Education, along with our partners, the Carnegie Corporation of New York and the Overdeck Family Foundation, we commend your commitment to join this conversation around how family engagement strategies can support student success. Together, we are raising the bar for parent partnership. I'm Cecily Darden, Special Assistant for Family Outreach at the U.S. Department of Education. We're committed to bringing together parents, school, local, state, and national leaders to make sure that every educator and every parent has the tools and resources they need to form strong partnerships between home and school. Let me give you an overview of what to expect during our time today. We will have an overview of the evidence from the field about family engagement strategies to support student mental health and well-being. That overview will be followed by 2 conversations highlighting bright spots from the field, where you will learn about how states and districts are implementing, and schools are implementing these practices. All of our panelists will then join in for a moderated panel discussion, followed by audience Q&A. While today we'll focus on strategies to support student mental health and well-being, we have 2 more webinars planned, which we will preview for you before we part ways today. But before getting into this rich agenda, let me introduce my colleague here at the U.S. Department of Education, Katie Neese. Katie is the Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services. In this capacity, she serves as advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Education on matters related to education of children and youth with disabilities, as well as employment and community living for youth and adults with disabilities. The mission of her office is to improve early childhood educational and employment outcomes, and to raise expectations for all people with disabilities, their families, their communities, and the nation. Katie?
Thank you, Cecily, and it's an honor to be with you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Department of Education's activities as it relates to student mental health, but wanted to give you just a little bit of a framework of what's motivating our activities. One, as you can see from this data from the Kaiser Family Foundation, The shortage of mental health professionals who are working in schools is profound and is profound across the nation. We also have an inadequacy of funding to support services. And we just have a lack of community providers who can provide these services to youth with mental health needs. So if we can go to the next slide. We also partner very closely with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And in a February report of this year, the CDC had 3 specific recommendations for how schools can be effective partners in addressing our youth mental health crisis. One is to increase school connectedness across all grades and for all youth. This concept of connectedness is really essential. And earlier this month, the Surgeon General put out an advisory that linked loneliness as having as significant negative health consequences as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The Surgeon General put out another advisory yesterday or today regarding the use of social media and its effect on youth mental health. And I know our panelists will be speaking to that later in the program, but wanted to highlight that for you as well. The other thing that the CDC said, 2 other things, was to increase access to services that are provided in schools or connecting youth to school-based services. The last one was implementing quality health education for all grades, so students understand what appropriate mental health looks like. But the bottom line is schools really are the gateway to many needed services for many young people. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So here at the department, we have 3 core priorities on our mental health agenda. One is to increase the capacity of people who are currently in schools. 2 is to increase the supply of mental health professionals who can work with students. And 3 is to increase funding through the Medicaid program to support school-based services, including mental health services. So we can go to the next slide. So last week, to date, progress to date, thanks to the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, Congress and the President directed $500 million to us over the next several years to increase the supply and capacity of mental health providers in schools. To date, we have awarded $280 million in grants across 264 projects that we hope will add an additional 14,000 mental health providers, in addition to increasing the capacity of folks that are in place right now. The other thing the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act provided was $1 billion that goes to state departments of education, who will then run a competition for school districts to apply for, so that school districts can make decisions for themselves about how they can create more safe and supportive learning environments for students. So those are very real dollars that have gone out the door over the past year, and we hope that this will make a difference. The next slide is my last slide. And last week on Thursday, we announced 2 important resources. One is a comprehensive guide to Medicaid services and claiming. And you would say, why is she talking about a Medicaid claiming guide? Well, one of the things we want to do is ensure that schools can get reimbursed for the services they know their students need. And we have been working with the Department of Health and Human Services for about 10 months on this guide that's designed. The primary audience are schools and the state Medicaid agencies on how they can set up processes so that schools can get reimbursed for school-based services that are covered by the Medicaid program. We expect that, we know that about half of school-age children are covered by Medicaid, and we know that this is a robust funding source, and we want to make sure that kids can get the services where they are, and where they are for most of the day is at school. We also issued a notice of proposed rulemaking on the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is the federal special education law. And the purpose of this new rule, proposed rule, is to streamline and make uniform the Medicaid billing consent process for parents. I don't know any parent who wants to do the same thing twice. And what we've done is eliminate a duplication in consent requirements so that all parents of all kids enrolled in Medicaid will have the same consent when it comes to billing. So we're hopeful that this will make it easier for schools to deliver the services that they know that children need, easier for schools to deliver on the special education services that they are required to provide to students with disabilities. And we hope that all of these activities together will make it easier for schools to meet the social, emotional, and mental health needs of all their students. So I would like now to, I think that's my last slide, to turn it over to Saskia Levy Thompson. Saskia is a program director in the education program at the Carnegie Corporation of New York. For the last 2 decades, she's worked at the intersection of education practice, policy, research, and philanthropy. She previously was a leader in the New York City Department of Education, including an appointment as Deputy Chancellor for Portfolio Planning, and served as the founding executive director of the Urban Assembly, a nonprofit network of college and career preparatory high schools. Thanks so much.
Thanks for the introduction, Katie. Hello, friends, and a warm welcome to all. I am, as you just heard, Saskia Thompson. I'm so excited to moderate today's discussion. I am a program director here at the Carnegie Corporation of New York, which is one of America's oldest grant-making foundations, and where through our education program, we have a dedicated portfolio focused on empowering families and communities to make change toward a more equitable and high-quality education system. That's why we're so grateful to partner with the U.S. Department of Education and Overdeck Family Foundation on this Family Engagement Learning Series. The topic of today's webinar is student mental health and well-being, which is timely, as you just heard, and which is also a central focus of the work I do at the corporation, which aims to improve and transform student learning so that it is personalized to the individual learner, organized around the core competencies and knowledge that young people need to be successful throughout their lives, and critically supportive of the whole child, including their social, emotional, and academic development. What that means is for the last 25 years, we've been partnering with organizations across the country that are working with educators, leaders, and communities to implement new strategies and solutions with the goal of offering many more robust, engaging, and meaningful learning opportunities for young people. Our partner organizations work with young people in a range of capacities and at different stages of kids' development. And we're going to hear directly from 3 of those organizations later in the webinar about the work they're doing to support youth mental health and well-being and how families can get involved. But before we turn to that, we are in for a real treat with our first speaker. And before I introduce her, I want to start on a personal note by saying that my most important qualification for today's discussion are not the items that Katie shared in my bio, but rather that I am the mom of 4, including 3 teenagers, which is to say that when I think about this topic, I look at it both in terms of the urgent youth mental health crisis that we are confronting as a nation today, but also think about it in my life as a parent, as my kids grapple with everything from how to get through a hard day to who they want to be when they grow up. And so it is with that lens that I am particularly delighted to introduce Dr. Pamela Cantor to offer opening remarks. Pam has had an extraordinary career, and her accomplishments are too many to mention. Pam was a practicing child and adolescent psychiatrist for decades, and then turned to harnessing all of the knowledge and learning gained from that experience as a physician to found a nonprofit organization called Turnaround for Children in order to help many others apply those lessons. Since its founding in 2002, Turnaround has drawn from research and practice to partner directly with educators in schools to transform their practice and create equitable, supported learning environments for all students. As you will understand in just a second, I often say that Pam is my favorite explainer in chief, and we are very lucky to have her here to frame today's conversation. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you, Saskia. Thank you all for inviting me to speak to you today about this incredibly important and timely conversation. Stress is everywhere in the lives of young people today. They have known uncertainty, disruption, grief, and it has taken a huge toll on them, and no group has been more affected than our teens. Stress is a big reason why kids are acting out in school, having difficulty focusing and engaging, or not coming to school at all. And stress is one of the most important drivers of the youth mental health crisis. There is a biology behind all of this, the biology of human development, biology of stress, and the biology of the human relationship itself. Developmental and learning science tell an optimistic story about what is possible for all of us, because human brains and bodies and abilities are malleable to experience. The brain is a dynamic living structure made up of tissue that is the most susceptible to change from experience of any tissue in the human body. And the brain is also malleable over time. Most of its growth happens after we're born. So there are multiple opportunities to catch up along the way. There are only 3 things I want you to remember about brain development: the astounding malleability of the human brain, experience-dependent growth, and the overwhelmingly important role of context. And by context, I mean environments, experiences, and relationships. And the best news is that these are all things that we can influence and build. Stress is the most common example we have of negative context. When we experience stress, the hormone cortisol floods our bodies and our brains. It's intense when it happens, but if the stress is mild or tolerable, it's adaptive. It makes us alert and sharp, and it helps us prepare for an event like a test or a performance. But when stress is unrelenting, when it is not buffered by the presence of someone we trust, we can get locked in that fight, flight, freeze feeling where it doesn't let up. And this can do a lot of damage to the learning structures of the brain, especially when those structures are developing. Because we know that adversity doesn't just happen to children, it happens inside their brains and bodies through the biologic mechanism of stress. But fortunately, that's not the end of the story, because there is a big upside when we turn to another hormone, the hormone oxytocin. Oxytocin is produced only one way: human connection. It hits the same structures in the brain as cortisol, but it is the more powerful hormone. Oxytocin can literally protect us at the cellular level from the damaging effects of cortisol. Relationships and trust are the antidote to stress. And this is why relationships are central to all development and learning. It is also why the effects of trauma are reversible. This might surprise you that I'm saying this, but it is. Not the events, of course, but the effects, the feelings associated with trauma are reversible. This is why trauma is not destiny. Think of the stories of people you know, who have overcome incredible things. In those stories, there is often one person who had their back, never gave up, helped them get through it, helped them even perform at higher and higher levels. So it makes me literally crazy when people talk about relationships as the soft stuff, because our brains are electrical structures and their primary energy source is human connection. This is what is required as the brain gets increasingly wired. This is called Hebb's law. Neurons that fire together, wire together. And as this happens, we become able to do increasingly complex things like reading, riding a bike, or building a robot. And there's more. Oxytocin sets up the conditions for curiosity, a state of biologic readiness to engage and absorb something new because we don't fear anything, including embarrassment. Curiosity is a drive state. It's not a cognitive skill. It is much more like appetite. It could be knowledge we're introduced to and we want more of it. It could be a new skill and a coach helps us see it is within reach. The chemical in charge of this is a neurotransmitter called dopamine. It is released when we are introduced to something that matters to us a lot, very often by someone who matters to us a lot. And the neural cocktail here is oxytocin plus dopamine. So let's see how to use this powerful biologic fact to support our kids today. So when we think about what young people are going through today, it's important to know that emotional wellness and emotional illness live on a continuum. Many think emotional illness is something you either have or you don't. Not true. What is really true is that every single cell and structure we are made of can get worn out because of cumulative stress. And cumulative stress can move us on this continuum from health and wellness toward illness. Think about running, basketball, tennis, and what happens to overworked knees and shoulders. The cumulative stress on any body part is called allostatic load. For a while, the body will adapt, and adaptation is a good thing. If we take care of our bodies with sleep, nutrition, stretching, coaching, wellness practices, which for young people often means staying away from people who make you feel bad or away from social media. If any of you heard Dr. Murthy's report that came out just today, he warns against the health risks associated with social media. You must take a look at this report. If we do this, we can not only protect ourselves from injury and illness, we can also increase fulfillment and performance. If we don't protect our human structures, they will wear out, and we can suffer injury and then have to recover. But when cumulative stress hits the brain, think about that flood of cortisol, and we don't do things to offset that stress, we can move from wellness toward illness. We can lose focus, get cranky and anxious, and symptoms of depression and anxiety can appear. This is what is going on today for millions of young people and their families. It's not surprising that after a once-in-a-century event like the pandemic, we are seeing sweeping emotional turmoil and a belief that learning has been lost. Time has been lost, but time for learning can be gotten back. Recovery from any setback, from illness and disruption is possible, but it does require fuel, energy, belief, agency in the person recovering. So adults have to know how to help. Example, in my practice, I saw children who had known all kinds of trauma and other kinds of setbacks. I would never talk to them about what they lost. I spoke about the new muscles. I often referred to them, I was a child therapist, as magic muscles that they were building and could draw on for the rest of their lives. I would tell them that there was an incredible opportunity in what they had faced, that they were brave, and they had learned many new things that most people don't know. Things because they had now gotten muscles that they would end up counting on for the rest of their lives because of what they had surmounted. We all know this to be true from our own lives. Today's crisis is not only about learning, it's not only about mental health, it is both. And it is coupled with a profound loss of belief that things can be different. So our job today is to put momentum back in that system, into all of the settings where kids are learning and growing. It's about loaning them our courage and belief. It's to reduce their stress. It's to help them move from illness toward wellness using their agency, and to support their active engagement in learning at the same time. This is all about fuel. Pathologizing, labeling, deficit frames will not work here. We can do this together. Today, we know that the insights from brain and learning science align profoundly with what so many parents know about their kids and want for their kids, and what so many teachers have been saying for years, that we can create learning environments and a system that recognizes children as whole people, values their assets, and supports them to excel in many ways. The message in the science is clear. We need a new design for our learning settings mapped to the way the brain grows and children learn, a design that combines positive developmental relationships, environments filled with safety and belonging, rich, meaningful, relevant learning experiences so students discover what they're capable of, the intentional development of the skills, mindsets, and habits that all successful learners have, and integrated supports by partnering with families. Linda Darling-Hammond with the Learning Policy Institute and I with my organization, Turnaround for Children, co-authored a playbook called The Guiding Principles for Whole Child Design that goes into detail about how to operationalize environments with these 5 core elements. The playbook is filled with case studies and resources and videos to make these principles come alive in your settings. And bringing these principles to life means settings designed for relationships and teamwork, teachers and families who know how the brain grows and how learning happens, and strong partnerships with families that create a web of relationships around each and every young person. Today, we know that a healthy context for learning and development requires attention to young people's safety, their health, their mental health, their social, emotional, and cognitive development, their academic skills, identities, and agency, all of them together, because it is one developmental story. Environments designed this way that combine purpose, connection, coaching, and the chunking of challenges will release an army of helpful hormones and neurotransmitters. That curiosity cocktail I described of oxytocin and dopamine that produce energy and curiosity, invite practice and success. And we all know that success begets more success. It's a positive flywheel, putting momentum around each and every young person. Today, we could start with a campaign of some don'ts and do's for the adults. Don't catastrophize. Children will believe what you believe. If you catastrophize, so will they. And this time is not going to mark them for life. And don't blame them. This pandemic, this lost learning time wasn't their fault, and they know it, and they do feel blamed. Do connect deeply with young people so they know they are loved and believed in. Do construct experiences that have purpose and relevance to them. Coach them toward accomplishment, and then notice and celebrate the accomplishments and successes, hopefully even before they do, and collaborate. Parents, teachers, coaches, guidance counselors, be the team that has the back of every single young person that you know, reducing their isolation, reconnecting them to their purpose, and releasing those helpful hormones. This will enable them to come through this time not just well, but with some of those new powerful muscles in the bank for the futures they will build for themselves and for our world. Thank you so much for letting me be with you today. And now I'm going to turn this back to Saskia.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Pam. I told you that you were in for a treat. And thank you. Every time I hear Pam talk about this work, I learn something new. I am now desperate to hone my own magic muscles and to get my hands on some curiosity cocktail. But I thank you for giving us hope and giving us so much information that is both grounded in research, but also actionable. So thank you for those remarks. And there are lots of questions popping into our Q&A about this recording being available after today, and it will be. So this will be posted. I think some of our listeners are going to want to hear it again and maybe share it with others. Now we are going to turn to some examples of what this looks like in action with our first two panelists. And I know it can be daunting to go first, especially in a lineup like this, but given Pam's points about the importance of relationships and community, I actually don't think we could have a better organization here to talk about their work. So I am going to introduce our first two panelists. Gary Lennon is the CEO of Peer Forward, a nonprofit organization that aims to close the opportunity gap by empowering students to lead their peers to and through higher education. He serves on the governing board of the New York City Department of Education and previously served as director of tutoring and K-12 operations for the Princeton Review. Gary is a graduate of Cornell University and a native New Yorker, as am I. I love you, Gary. Maftuna Hyderova is a Peer Forward senior peer leader at Cobble Hill School of American Studies in Brooklyn, New York. She plans to major in nursing at Hofstra University. She also works as a Taekwondo instructor for people of all ages. Gary and Maftuna, thank you so much for being with us. I am going to hand it over to you both to talk to us about mental health and the secondary to post-secondary transition, particularly through the lens of what you're hearing directly from young people. And if we have time when you're done with your presentation, I will pose a couple of quick follow-ups before we move to our next spotlight. Gary and Maftuna, the stage is all yours.
Great, good afternoon. Thank you so much. I'm really excited about the conversations that we're having today. And thank you to Dr. Cantor, because everything that you just said helped to solidify and reinforce why we do the work that we do. As you mentioned, Gary Lennon, I'm CEO of Peer Forward and been with the organization for 16 years. And one of the reasons why I'm actually joined this work, it's because of relationships. You know, what I noticed is that there were individuals that looked just like me, that sound just like me, but were not afforded the same type of opportunities that came from my community. And I was like, something needs to change today, because my friends should have the same type of opportunities that I did. And that's why I mentioned Cornell, because I'm like, not everybody went, but my friends from Spanish Harlem should have had the same opportunity. And the reason why they didn't is because of the environments in which that they were around. And that's part of what Dr. Cantor was referring to about how the environmental factors influence people's decisions, their ability to be able to make positive choices in their communities. And I'm at Cobble Hill right now, so they're about to make an announcement. But in short, Peer Forward works with high schools and colleges to get individuals to and through college. And the way in which that we do that is that we train and mobilize the most influential student in a school building to be able to help their friends. Because as Dr. Cantor mentioned, like, what's the most valuable thing? It's the relationships that you build with individuals in your certain communities. You know, and we all know, you know, as parents, as, you know, aunts and uncles, we all have children or, you know, younger adults. We can say anything till we're blue in the face and we know it's accurate. But the moment that their friend, somebody that they consider a peer, says it, it's all of a sudden golden. And I'm like, I know I told you, but it's golden to them. And so how do you cultivate that type of experience for young adults to know that they actually have a community of individuals that understand what they're going through and they get the chance to move along together, which is quintessential, and hence why we've been doing this work. We impact about 80,000 students annually across the country. And obviously we have a lot of great work that we're doing here in New York City. Maftuna is going to talk more about the role that she serves as that influential person within her school building. But I wanted to highlight on these slides the work that's happening in particular to mental health, right? So as I mentioned, we train and mobilize students. We thought if I could just get you into college, everything is fine. That was the original assumption. And then what we learned is that it's more than just getting them to fill out an application. There are environmental factors the moment they get up in the morning to when they actually get into the school building that's affecting their psyche and how they actually show up every day. And during the pandemic, that was exacerbated, and our peer leaders, our young adults brought it to our attention where they said, there are a lot of mental health issues that our friends are facing. We need to be able to put support structures in place because individuals are feeling, particularly during the pandemic and beyond, that there was no safe space for them. Who can they actually talk to without feeling ridiculed, without feeling ostracized? Because there's this stigma around mental health and mental wellness being something as if it's something wrong, when all of us actually understand that mental health is a critical factor in how we actually show up and what we need to do every day. And our peer leaders saw that. And so these are what they've been doing. Like they actually launched campaigns, and Maftuna will talk about this, and published videos around mental health so that people understood that it is okay to talk about anxiety. It is okay to talk about stress. It's okay to talk about basic needs and the lack thereof and how that is actually affecting you. So when you show up in school, I may not be my best self today. It's just because I'm dealing with a lot and a lot of it's on my shoulders. But if I can turn to the left and to the right and realize that some of my friends are going through the same thing, that relationship that's being built is going to help me propel to be like, I don't need you to solve the problem for me. I just need to know I have a community that's going to support me as we go through this journey. And that we've seen across the country. If you want to go to the next slide, please. And some of the other things that we've seen, for example, in Maryland, where they created Wellness Wednesdays, where people actually just showed up and talked about, hey, I'm feeling great today, I'm not feeling great today. And so how do you make sure that you be able to create a safe space for them to have those conversations? And for them, the biggest thing is like, we wanted to make sure that we can allow our students to take a moment and write down what are some of the challenges that they're actually having. So that then in turn, our end goal is to make sure that they still have a post-secondary degree or at least get in. But if you don't feel good, all of that doesn't matter. And Maftuna has seen that, time and time again. So I want to kick it to her. If you want to go to, I think that's our last slide there, to really talk about safe zones and what Peer Forward actually does. And so Saskia, do you want to go ahead and, well, Maftuna, please introduce yourself and then we can jump to Saskia.
Yes, hello, I'm Maftuna. I'm a senior at Cobble Hill High School, and I joined Peer Forward during sophomore year during quarantine through other peers from our school. And I really like this program, and I really like what it does and how it helps students, not only students, but involving the parents as well.
Great. I'm happy to jump in. Maftuna, keep yourself off mute for a moment, because my first question is going to be for you in this critical role that Gary just described as a peer leader. What are you hearing directly from your fellow students, especially vis-a-vis mental health and well-being and what feel like the most pressing concerns to them?
With my peers, we have a lot in common, since most of my peers around me, their parents are immigrants, so they seem to have a lot on their shoulders, and mostly they seem stressed about what's going on, and they are stressed about what's going to happen in the future and how they're afraid to make mistakes and how that's going to affect them in the future. And they seem to struggle opening up about what they're feeling and how they're feeling, and it's difficult for them to talk to their parents or educators. So we're there to help them, since we have the same struggles, and we can connect in a way that they might not be able to connect with their parents or educators.
That's fantastic. Gary, I want to ask you a question about Peer Forward's work, and given the way that you center young people to make change, help us understand how families fit into this model.
Great question. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about community. There's, when you think about any systemic challenge, the answer is always going to be community. So families have to play a pivotal role. And to be quite frank, it's either it works in the best interest or it may not work in the best interest, because, everybody has their own expectations on what they're looking for. And again, back to the stigmatism around mental health, generationally, we just think about it differently. And our young adults right now are much more inclined to be very open about it. And just as a 40-something-year-old man, I was not brought that way. And so families play a critical role in it because they move as a unit, working with a high immigrant population. Individuals don't want to leave home, for example, now. And families influence our young adults' choices. And so, as we talk about a little bit later, like what they can be doing, it's like you can make or break a situation for young adults because they look up to you.
That is a perfect segue. I will flip this back to you in 1 second, Gary, but I want to ask Maftuna first. What would your recommendations be for how we can strengthen the family connection around mental health and destigmatize, to Gary's point?
Adding on to what Gary said, everything applying to colleges and moving forward with our life right now is new to us and our parents as well. So our parents, they might not be as open to listening as much. So I would recommend them to listen and open up to what the student is going through. That's why we hold campaigns that include parents so they can actually see what we're going through and how the college application process is like, so they can see what the process is like and try to connect with us more. I feel like them seeing what the process is like helps them visualize what we're going through and what the challenges we're coming across. So I think communication goes a long way, and I just advise them to communicate more often and to just listen to us and see what we're actually doing and how we're actually doing it.
Okay, Maftuna, received. As a parent of teenagers, received.
Yes.
Gary, do you want to build sort of from a bird's eye view on how we can strengthen this link and make it easier for us to lock arms with parents and collaboratively support young people?
And I think this honestly goes right back to what Dr. Cantor was talking about, like how do we change the narrative? And when you're thinking about purpose, connection, and coaching, parents can play a pivotal role in that piece. But at the end of the day, you have to meet your child where they are. I mean, sometimes that is where we miss there's a missing link because we have high expectations for our children, which 100% agree with. But if we don't meet them where they are and provide positive positive coaching and support throughout the journey, and then also show a level of vulnerability, which I think is something that sometimes is actually missed in this conversation. That is from a bird's eye view where we see individuals notice that parents are actually human too. They're not just parents.
Spoken like a fellow parent, Gary, I hear you. I am gonna move us. I could continue talking to the two of you forever, and you've given us so many great breadcrumbs that I think we're going to be able to follow through the subsequent panels and spotlights that we're providing today. So Gary, Maftuna, thank you. Stay tuned because you're going to come back in when we join together for a group Q&A at the end of the presentations. So I am going to move us into a conversation about understanding the factors that can influence well-being and mental health in the digital world with our partners, Common Sense Media. So let me introduce our three speakers, and then I am again going to hand it over to them so that they can kind of narrate for us what this looks like in practice, and in the case of some of our presenters right now, what the research tells us. And then we will come back together if there's time for probably maybe just one question, since we have three speakers this time. Eisha Buch is the Director of Education Programs at Common Sense Media, which is dedicated to improving the lives of kids and families by providing trustworthy information and the independent voice to thrive in a world of media and technology. Eisha oversees the organization's K-12 digital literacy and citizenship program. And before joining Common Sense over 7 years ago, she was a middle school teacher and administrator here in New York City. You're going to start to detect a bias, I think, with our panelists and the New York City representation. Dr. Emily Weinstein is principal investigator at Project Zero at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She has spent the past decade researching how technology shapes teens' lives and development and how adults can best support kids who are growing up with unprecedented connectivity. Finally, Laura Ogando is Deputy Technology Director with the New York City Department of Education. She became an advocate for using technology to advance equity and access for all learners after working as an elementary school special educator, developing a curriculum that brought together digital literacy, computer science, and project-based learning. Today, she trains teachers in New York and nationally about digital learning, literacy, and citizenship. Eisha, Emily, Laura, please take us away.
Thank you so much, Saskia. We are so happy to be a part of this really important conversation. Common Sense is a nonprofit whose mission is to help kids and families thrive in a media and tech-rich world. We want young people to be able to harness all of media and tech's potential for learning, creative expression, and connection, and help them avoid the potential harms and challenges that media and tech can also present. In essence, our mission is to raise a generation of digital citizens. Next slide, please. So what is a digital citizen? It's someone who can think critically, make healthy choices, and participate responsibly in a digital world. Next slide. Common Sense is officially 20 years old this year, which is very exciting. And back in 2007, in collaboration with our research partners at Project Zero at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, we developed a digital literacy and citizenship curriculum for schools. The first iteration of the program was released just when smartphones were picking up steam, if you can even recall what that life was like. And for the past 13 years, we have been continuing to update and expand the curriculum as the media and tech landscape evolves and new challenges emerge. The curriculum covers 6 core topics: media balance and well-being, privacy and security, digital footprint and identity, relationships and communication, cyberbullying, digital drama and hate speech, and news and media literacy. It's a free curriculum that covers grades K through 12 and is used by over 1 million educators in over 85,000 schools across the country. Next slide, please. The curriculum is designed to be a low lift for teachers. Each lesson is fully scripted and comes with presentation slides, student handouts, end of lesson quizzes, and related family tips and activities. Next slide. There are 3 components that really guide our approach to the curriculum. First, we are always evolving and adding to the program to address top concerns. Mental health and well-being is of utmost importance and is a really, really big concern to all of our stakeholders, something that we've heard educators talk about, parents and caregivers, and teens themselves. And this is truly a primary focus area for new curriculum development for us. 2, life with media and tech is complicated and it's nuanced, and our lessons try to acknowledge this reality, having students grapple with scenarios that invite them to be self-reflective and explore different perspectives. 3, digital citizenship must be a whole community approach. We have lessons for students, we have professional development for teachers, and we have family engagement resources for caregivers. We believe that to raise a generation of digital citizens, young people need support from all of the adults in their lives. And I just think listening to Dr. Cantor and listening to the team at Peer Forward, it's just very, very obvious that having all of those supports is what helps push teens into better places. Next slide, please. I don't want to spend too much time here, but I just wanted to share really quickly that ultimately at the core, what we want young people to be able to do is be self-reflective, ask critical questions, consider perspectives, understand what their options are when they're faced with these difficult situations, and ultimately be able to take action. Next slide, please. Back to the first point of addressing top concerns. As we know, media and tech's impact on mental health and well-being is profound. The U.S. Surgeon General and the American Academy of Pediatrics have declared a youth mental health crisis, and there's no denying that media and tech are exacerbating the issues in very serious ways. The APA just came out with new guidelines for social media use, and we just talked about at the top of this session around how the Surgeon General has also released new guidelines as well. Next slide, please. Common Sense has been studying the role of media and technology on teens' mental and social well-being for nearly a decade, and the research on the connection between social media use and rising adolescent mental health issues, such as anxiety and depression, is complex and ambiguous. But we know that the amount of time that young people spend on social media is not the only or even the most important variable. And as we at Common Sense think about addressing this in a school context, we are aware that one, there is a spectrum of mental health issues that present in schools. And two, we have to make a clear distinction about what we can have a classroom teacher teach versus what requires a licensed mental health professional. As we develop new content to support digital well-being, we are also thinking thoughtfully about what does teacher training look like? What related resources are we going to provide for families that are going to be the most valuable to them? And what does a peer-to-peer model of this content look like? It was really encouraging to listen to Maftuna just talk about how powerful it is for young people to be able to build community and talk to each other. We know that that is one of the most powerful ways to get support around these stressors. And so that's a really big priority for us moving forward. Digital citizenship and well-being is more important than ever before, and we are so excited to be continuing our longstanding partnership with Project Zero to help inform this next phase of our work. So without further ado, I'd love to turn it over to Dr. Emily Weinstein to share some more.
Great, thanks, Eisha. So Eisha told you a bit about the curriculum, and I wanted to share some brief context on how research and evidence-based practices continue to inform important decisions and directions in the resources that are available in the curriculum. So for example, our research team did one study where we asked more than 3,500 middle and high schoolers what worries them most about growing up with today's technologies. And we co-interpreted that data right alongside teens. And my longtime research partner, Carrie James, and I wrote this book that you can see on this slide. It's called Behind Their Screens, What Teens Are Facing and Adults Are Missing. And we got to work immediately with the Common Sense team to make sure that what adults are missing actually isn't missing from the curriculum. And in our research, we hear stories that touch on a wide range of issues relevant to kids, including things that are echoed today in the new Surgeon General's advisory, like tech habits and problematic use, but also issues that may not fully be on adults' radars, like navigating some of the complex friendship dilemmas that come up in the context of social media use. Next slide, please. Youth voice is essential because hearing from young people often anchors really different ways of thinking about good support and effective engagement, especially where tech is concerned. And in that spirit, 2 example quotes on this slide that echo hundreds more, like, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings if I can't stay in touch with them. We know that it can be hard for teens to figure out phone boundaries in situations where disconnecting from their tech for their own self-care actually gets pitted against wanting to be a good friend, which is so important developmentally. Using hypothetical, next slide, please. Using hypothetical dilemma scenarios is one really powerful pedagogical practice for getting teens talking about these kinds of issues. And in the curriculum, we have these digital dilemma scenarios about important topics that get paired with questions to help teens go beyond their gut reactions, like, oh, just tell them you're busy, and really encourage self-reflection, perspective taking, and actually practicing communication. Like, what could you say? How do you tell a friend if their texting is overwhelming? How do you actually go about that communication and setting those boundaries? Next slide, please. We've also heard a lot from teens in recent years about concerns specifically related to the pull of the screen and tech habits, which is another important theme in the Surgeon General's advisory today, and also in the new APA guidelines that were mentioned. I want to just say here that adults are extremely concerned about screen time, of course, but most of us don't appreciate that beneath the pleas for 5 more minutes, young people are actually worried about what it's costing them too. And they are extremely reflective in many cases about their own tech habits and their screen time. So how do we tap that? One example in the curriculum, we can jump to the next slide, is a digital habits checkup and tech habit challenge that use some principles from motivational psychology and from habit science to help students really take stock of their current habits, identify a tech habit that they want to change, and then create a personal challenge to actually try making that change. So maybe it's trying a different bedtime routine or changing up how much they use TikTok. What's really cool is that they actually pick a habit they want to take on themselves. So this also gets towards supporting teens' own sense of agency over their habits. And in the vein of mental health, Eisha and I wanted to just briefly share 2 things we're collaborating on right now that aren't out yet, but will be this summer for free ahead of back to school. So with an interdisciplinary team that includes clinical psychologists, educators, designers, and teens, we've been co-creating some new lessons that bring evidence-based approaches linked to well-being into the classroom. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see one of them. Oh, sorry, you can jump ahead one more. You can see on this screen a little screen grab of a value sort activity where students consider values that they care about, what's most important to me right now, and then think very carefully through the ways those values are supported or compromised by tech and tech habits. And this is really a great entry point for engagement for all of us, talking about what are your families or your community's values, and how does tech help us live those values or in some cases interfere or undercut them. Another activity that I'm extremely excited about, you can see on the slide under the Thinking Traps header, draws on CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and learning about cognitive distortions or thinking traps. And you can actually see these, they're kind of small here, but represented on this slide, which is from a handout in a lesson where teens actually learn how to identify traps in their thinking that come up related to tech and social media use and start learning how to label and challenge those thoughts. So most of us have probably had an experience of mind reading, for example. Like if someone doesn't respond promptly to your email and you immediately worry that it's because you've done something wrong or they're mad at you. This can really ramp up anxiety when there are actually plenty of other explanations for a delayed response. And these kinds of thinking traps are especially relevant in an age of social media and smartphones. So learning about them is an example of one evidence-based practice that we think is all the more important in the context of digital citizenship and family engagement around tech. I'm going to hand over to Laura on that note.
Thank you, Emily. So here in the New York City public school system, we have been working really hard to implement the beautiful curriculum that Eisha described, and it can be challenging. I don't know if folks know, but here in New York City, we are the largest school system in the United States, which, you know, I guess it's a great point to highlight, but it also presents really major challenges. So in order to address that, we work with various stakeholders here in our system to make sure that they know about the resources and the curriculum available, and then actually have what they need to implement it on the ground. So we work with our teachers, we work with our administrators, but I'm really excited to share the work that we've done with our parent coordinators, because we know that, as described, we have to help our families. And part of what we're doing is not just teaching kids, but we have to teach them. So many families have said, I don't know the latest app. I'm completely lost with what's happening on TikTok. Is it safe? Is it not? I thought it was just dancing, but I've heard it's more. So we've worked with a particular office here in our public school system called FACE. It is the Family and Community Empowerment Office, and they are a direct lifeline to our parent coordinators. And the reason parent coordinators are really critical to this work is that when a parent comes to a school and says, hey, the device is broken, or I need support, they don't typically go to the teacher. The teacher's in the classroom teaching. So that's what the parent coordinator is. They act as that lifeline, that kind of glue between the family and parent community and the school. So by supporting our parent coordinators, by teaching them about the digital citizenship resources, we're able to spread the word and support everyone in this process. So we started out delivering workshops around this back in September of 2020. We did it on a weekly basis. We reached, on average, about 300 parent coordinators in every session. And there's a parent coordinator in every school, and we have roughly 1,800 schools. So we were reaching quite a large group of folks, and we were able to share these resources. Now, we have since migrated to a monthly meeting, but we continue to support these very critical folks in our system. And I can report back to say that many of the parent coordinators who are now helping implement these plans and helping to support families have reported that they see families taking a more active role. They feel empowered to help their kids, and they're just seeing an overall sense of success and confidence that they didn't see before. So we just got to keep going with it.
Fantastic. Guys, thank you so much. And I had a feeling we were going to run out of time for questions right now, but I will redirect when we bring back all of our panelists to have a conversation about this together. Thank you so much. And as you heard noted in those presentations, thinking about this in a digital world is a particularly hot topic today, given the Surgeon General's announcement. So we really appreciate that deep dive. We are now going to turn to our final two panelists who are going to talk to us about designing learning experiences that support the whole child. And I will introduce the two of them so that they can describe their work. And I am so excited because what my question would have been to the Common Sense team is give us some actionable strategies about, what can parents and those who are supporting young people do right this minute in terms of their practice. And I think you're going to hear some very concrete examples of what it would look like to design for this kind of support right now. It's my pleasure to introduce Jen Charlot, who is a partner at Transcend, a nonprofit organization that works to create and spread extraordinary equitable learning environments by catalyzing systemic change and directly partnering with schools to support and democratize school redesign. Jen previously oversaw research and development at Transcend and now leads a portfolio of projects focused on early stage school design. Cynthia Robinson Rivers is also a partner at Transcend, where she supports schools to adopt the whole child model that she developed while serving as the head of school at Van Ness Elementary in Washington, D.C., where I am happy to say I had the opportunity and pleasure of visiting in the very early days of her implementation of that model. She also has district level experience at DC public schools, where she focused on strengthening teacher performance, recognition, retention, and that included developing a teacher career ladder. So Jen and Cynthia, I'm going to hand it over to you, and then I have a couple of questions that I'm hoping I have time to pitch your way.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. As Saskia said, my name is Jen Charlot. I work at Transcend. We heard Pam earlier talk about the importance of context and the environment. So when you walk into a space, how do you feel? How do the people make you feel? How does the culture make you feel? Think? What does it make you do? All those things. And so what Transcend does is really focus on the design of learning environments. And so we partner with communities across the country, and we help them go through a design process and think through how should school really be designed to truly support learners. Next slide, please. As you can see, we're a pretty large organization. And the reason why I wanted to bring up this slide is just to show that we are in over 400 schools across the country and over 30 states, because that's how big this challenge is, that so many folks across the country are really eager to redesign schools because we know that it's not all working for young people. Next. So when you walk into public schools, maybe it's not black and white, the pictures are not black and white anymore, but in a lot of places, it looks and feels this way. And just ask yourself a question right now. When you're looking at this picture, if you were sitting in this classroom, how would you feel? Would you feel happy and joyous and like you could take over the world and, all of those things? Probably not. And all of that impacts the mental health and well-being of young people. And so when we talk about redesigning school, we really think through what are the experiences and outcomes that we want for young people. And we want to make sure that those are broad. Next slide. So we want the experiences to be engaging. We want kids to be full of life. We want them to be equitable. And so those are the kinds of things that we're driving toward. So you might be asking yourself right now, okay, well, how exactly do you do that? Next slide. We do that by partnering hand in hand, and we use the word community, And that includes students, families, and educators who are in and outside of the school building. And we work with them collaboratively in order to understand what is it that the community wants and needs. So in my work with families, not too long ago, I heard a lot of families in the Bronx where I live talk about like, hey, I want more financial literacy. I want more opportunities for kids to go out into the city. And when we hear those things, we take that into account and then we help schools redesign for those purposes. Next slide. One of the pieces that we hear often is around the mental health and well-being of young people. So we've created a set of resources that you can find on our website that can help you as an educator actually design toward that end. We've, like I said, partnered with several schools. My colleague Cynthia is going to share an example of what that redesign process has yielded in her setting.
And you can go on to the next slide. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to join. I'm excited to share more about the whole child model and its approach to student well-being and family engagement. Next slide. So the whole child model originated in DC Public Schools, where I was formerly a principal. And there are three complementary parts to the model. Student as maker and student ownership for learning are two components, but well-being is the component that is most well-developed and that we are currently sharing with partner schools, and the part of the model I'll share with you today. Student well-being has three parts that you'll see on the next slide. A set of school-wide supports that we call CARE, which stands for compassion, assertiveness, routines, and environment. Tailored interventions or boosts for students who need additional support with either behavior or academics. And then finally, Family Circle, which is our way of supporting and partnering with families. To double click on CARE on the next slide, it is the set of universal supports that all children receive. It includes aspects such as the physical room environment, structured routines that have visual supports, and even the language and tone of voice we use to address students so that we can ensure safety and clarity of expectations. One example of a CARE component that you'll see on the next slide is called Strong Start. It's a morning routine where every child receives a personalized greeting, sets an intention for the day, has breakfast in the classroom, engages in paired and group activities that help build connections between students, and learn explicit strategies to gain composure when they're feeling upset. And by the end of these activities, students are more likely to be in a state of mind that is ready for learning. Another example of CARE on the next slide is the physical design of the classroom, where teachers intentionally use student and family photos, specialized lighting and seating, natural materials, and carefully display student work to make the room environment inviting, accessible, and reflective of the students and their cultures. So on the next slide, you'll see practices like Strong Start and classroom design aim to make school feel warm and inviting. But the real purpose of these routines is rooted in brain science. We know that if students come to school fearing for their basic physical safety, their brain stems are in control, they're focused on fight, flee, or surrender instead of learning. We first have to help them regulate through activities like breathing exercises. If they come to school emotionally upset, they're also not ready to learn. Their limbic system, their amygdala are in charge, and in that state, we need to relate to them by making connections and showing empathy. Where we want students to be is in their reasoning state, where their prefrontal cortex is in charge, they're ready to learn. And all of those practices and CARE aim to help children get into that state if they came to school not. On the next slide, we know that when it's done well, CARE meets the needs of the vast majority of students, but some students will need more support, which we call boost. And these are proactive strategies in some cases, like new student orientation or pairing students with a preferred adult, and interventions that ensure safety, like restorative and school suspension. An example on the next slide of a proactive boost support is TLC, Time Love Connection. It's a once daily check-in in which a child receives daily unconditional positive attention from a trusted adult. And this benefits students who feel less safe or less connected at school. Then on the next slide is an example of a responsive boost support. This one is structured recess. For students who have caused harm, it's an opportunity to teach them how to play safely in a supportive environment in a small group setting, while also ensuring safety for the other children without ever taking away the child's chance to play outdoors. And then on the next slide is the last part of well-being, which is family circle. We learned about many of these strategies from a family engagement focused organization called Flamboyant. The family circle helps us to engage parents and families as partners through home visits, consistent two-way communication, and an academic approach to partnering with parents that emphasizes setting goals with them, leveraging their academic support for students at home. If you'd like to learn more about family engagement strategies, resources on the model are available on our website on the next slide, with the aim being that any school who wants to center the whole child will be able to access these resources on our website to support the students in their schools. And I will give it back to you, Saskia.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And you guys get a gold star. Thank you for getting through so much rich content so quickly, because it will give us just a couple of minutes to talk specifically about the whole child model. And then I want to bring Jen in to talk about another model that she's working on. And then we can bring all of our panelists back after that to have a Q&A together. Cynthia, you went so deep on specific practices that you kind of preempted the question that I was going to ask you. But one of the things that is coming in our Q&A is around mental health supports and wellness, not only for learners, but for the adults that support them. And particularly given your background, which was largely around teacher development before you were doing before you were leading your school, I wonder if you could take a moment to think of some practices or ways that you approach this when it comes to the adults in the community and attending to their mental health needs.
It's such an excellent question, and I'm glad it was asked because it's probably a glaring omission for me. The component that we start with every school with which we partner is adult well-being. Working with school leaders to think about ways to support their teachers with the understanding that the teachers can't be supportive of the students if they themselves are not well. And with the understanding that right now, unlike any time in my 20s or so years working in schools, have teachers been so stressed, and we're seeing it. We've talked with our schools about building in structures that allow for teachers to be well, right? So having a tap out, formalized, systematized plan so that if a teacher feels stressed, they can be replaced for a moment, even if just for a few moments, to gain composure before going back to their students. Whenever possible, having team teaching, which inherently, when you reduce the teacher-child ratio, reduces stress, reduces the amount of responsibility on the teacher. And then teaching them strategies for staying composed with their own, how they were raised as a child in mind, where they identified their own triggers, where they practice when it's not a stressful time, how they might regain composure, which many of the teachers that we work with refer to that practice, that formal work, aside from the components of the model, being critical for them in implementing it well.
Those are so helpful. Jen, I want to just, if you could spend a minute for us, in addition to your leadership at Transcend, you've been working to design and spread an innovative model in the South Bronx called RevX. And I know that families have been critical to shaping that model and that approach. What are you seeing and learning from RevX students, families, and educators about how to get at mental health and supports?
Yeah, one of the things that has come up, just by way of background, so RevX is a real world learning model. One of the things that are really unique about it is that the curriculum is responsive. So what that means is that the curriculum is built based on what is going on for young people and for families and or business partners in the community. And because we've started with K-5, families have been such an important part in shaping what the curriculum is. And when you really look at the topics that they want to address, the topics are around things that are very pressing to them and actually impact their stress levels and mental health. Things like discrimination, or like I mentioned earlier, financial literacy. When you have a curriculum that is responsive, what it does is it provides the space for families and for students to talk about this thing that they are grappling and sitting with. We had a student one time come in and say, we really want to do a module on discrimination because she wants to know why it's more likely for her dad to get shot. And so when you have that going on in the brains of young people, being able to have a space where they learn about the academic and psychology behind discrimination, and then what are the strategies in the world that go on with it. And then families come in toward the end and participate, and their students teach them all the things that they've learned. And so you have this bi-directional educational moment, and also more opportunities for families and students to connect over things that they are thinking about. And so this integrative model really thinks through, like, how do you support mental health and wellness and address the issues that are causing stress for young people?
That is a powerful example. And I want to thank you both for scoping what is possible across the work that you have done in schools individually and that you're facilitating in your role as design partners at Transcend. In just a second, I am going to bring all of the panelists back. So because we're running behind schedule, I am going to try to weave in the questions we've been getting from the audience and that we received ahead of time into the questions that I was planning to pose to all of you. But before I do that, I want to first just invite Pam back on camera for a moment to be a bit of a respondent to this beautiful array of practice that we have heard described across the panels. And I'm wondering, Pam, if you could reflect across what we've heard about any big themes or universal practices. Your don'ts and do's were so helpful in that regard. What did you hear as we heard Peer Forward, Common Sense, and Transcend talk about their work with schools?
Yeah. One of the things that I was thinking of, and it was like a word cloud where suddenly there was just one word that I was seeing in bigger and bigger letters. And the word was trust. Every single story that has been told has been a story of recognizing that building trust with children and building trust with families creates a biological setting for growth. Trying to do any of this work without that, it doesn't happen. Now, trust does have a biology associated with it, and that is the hormone oxytocin. And the hormone oxytocin is a hormone that is a learning knitter. It is a stress buster. It has so many positive functions. So you look at Cynthia's stories, it was a story recognizing that if you don't get kids in a self-regulated state, they can't learn. Maftuna's story is a story about trust and oxytocin and recognizing that children won't be open about their mental health issues, and neither will parents if you don't build trust. So, and then the folks, all three of the people talking about social media is, could social media possibly be a mechanism for learning about what to trust and what not to trust? So the word trust is what I see in every single one of these presentations. And what's heartening to me is the recognition that coming from all these different directions, no matter what your portal of entry is, all of them recognized that accessing trust between humans is the gateway to being able to solve the things that are in front of us right now.
Oh, Pam, thank you so much. Now let's all come back on camera together if we can, so that I can pose some questions. And I'm going to try to shout out a couple of your names at a time for the questions that I have and that our audience has had today, just so that you can be ready and thinking about it. But if others want to jump in and build, please feel free to do so. So the first prompt I want to direct toward Eisha, Jen, and Gary as our first respondents. So I'm interested to know how the pandemic and the shift that we experienced in going to virtual and or hybrid learning changed your approach in terms of supporting student well-being, and to the extent that it created new opportunities or there were lessons learned there, especially around how to engage families. I'd love to hear how you've been able to sustain those practices. So Eisha, do you want to talk about what Common Sense is seeing in this regard?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think there's kind of two ways in which we help support families and caregivers. One that was, I shared a lot more about earlier is through the curriculum and really ensuring that teachers are teaching lessons and then have relevant resources that they can share about the topic and connect it with home. The other thing is that Common Sense in general, as you may know, like what Common Sense Media is known for is rating and reviewing all media and tech for kids and for their well-being and learning. So we also, with that, have a channel to parents and families directly where we share advice and we host events to help continue to have that ever learning experience. The pandemic absolutely shifted the way in which we could reach families. One, I would say they inherently became more engaged in the learning process because they had no choice, right? They were oftentimes the second teacher right next to the child. So they had to get more involved. And I think that was an opportunity for us to engage them more deeply. And I would say that engagement hasn't really left. Like once parents became that involved, yes, they're now back in school, like students are back in school, but there is a level of investment and parents are hungry to help support their children. So it's really us thinking about how we can deliver those resources. Online events just like this one have become so powerful. And I think as we're showing right here, these are here to stay. So we've continued to do webinar type events and asynchronous learning events for parents and caregivers. We continue to share advice and disseminate that through emails and newsletters, through social media, and through channels where we can reach parents where they're at and that they can do this on their own time. And from a pedagogical approach, we also really leaned into quicker activities. I think we all are very aware of the stressors that this brought about on educators, and to ask them to do one more thing is a lot. And they're asked that every single day for 10 different things. And so how can we make it quick, digestible, something that was able, like remote friendly, and also continues to be that way. And so we've really adapted kind of the way in which we're creating lessons to help promote that. And we feel like those are practices that are probably going to stay and are best suited for us to continue doubling down on.
That's great. I think we're seeing that in our chat right now where people are like, I want a recording of this because then it can live on and be reinforced and we can come back to this content again and again. Jen, take us sort of to the school level, if you would, and how did that shift toward the disconnection and the interruption of the pandemic inform the ways in which you were connecting with families and with young people and keeping that tight triangle between school, parent, or caretaker and young person learner?
Yeah, Eisha mentioned a lot of the points, right? Like prior to the pandemic, it was the norm to expect families to come into a building in most schools. And then the capacity to do conferencing online, to have parents sit directly next to young people as they're doing their work, to have work sent digitally and have parents be able to access it via Google Classrooms and things like that. Those things are more now the norm, and I agree, have not gone away. So from a systems perspective, I think we're seeing of systems really ask themselves, like, why can't we also be hybrid, right? The pandemic is over, but what's stopping us from actually having online school? We did it for over a year. And so why should we stop? And you're seeing families ask for that flexibility, especially in immigrant communities where they want to travel home to see their other family members, but don't want to interrupt schooling. And online learning really provides an opportunity to do that. And the pandemic opened that door.
Thanks, Jen. Gary, you work with young people who know more about technology than we could ever hope to on this panel. Do you want to say just a couple of words about how going through this great transformation together has changed the way that young people are navigating the secondary to post-secondary transition, and also how your organization is working with or engaging families in the broader circle?
Great, thank you. I mean, I echo what everyone else said, like the leveraging technology, it's not going anywhere. It's changed our mindset. And the young adults are the individuals that reminded us how antiquated our thought process is in technology. And so that is what, as a organization and with other nonprofits, to say what's the most easiest type of technology you should be using that makes it digestible for individuals, and make sure that you can put it at the hands of our young adults, because as they're transitioning to post-secondary institutions, they're questioning the value of college. And so we need to now uplift technology and information, trusted information, let me put it that way, to make sure that people understand that it's not going anywhere. And so that's what we learned during the pandemic. It's leveraging our young adults. TikTok was a phenomenal for them, and I'm like, run with it, because I'm not getting on TikTok.
Thank you so much. We are running out the clock. And so I just want to pose one final question. Pam, I'm wondering if you can just close us out with this. We have some broad questions about how we should think about the developmental needs across the different ages and stages of student development. And we've also gotten a bunch of prompts from the audience Q&A about thinking about all of this through the broadest possible lens, thinking about the wide variety of contexts, not just the New York City school that Gary and Maftuna are sitting in, but rural contexts, places that are far more isolated, and thinking about the individuals involved through the broadest possible lens, not just parents and guardians and caretakers, but any caring, consistent adult that is in a young person's life. So can you leave us, you gave us a great frame at the beginning. Can you close us out with a heuristic for how we can think about supporting mental health needs across the full developmental continuum?
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I have heard throughout all of the work that I've done with children directly is every single child can name a person that saw who they could be before they did. I have had children in my office holding on to notes that were written by their camp counselors from 10 years ago, because the note said something that conveyed belief, something that conveyed, I know you, I know who you are, and I know what you're capable of. And every single one of us can have that moment with a young person. And that kind of moment can be powerful enough to change the trajectory of a child's life. So it can mean the difference between, yes, I am depressed, but this person knows what I'm capable of, so I'm going to go there. I don't even think that I could underestimate, or I mean overestimate, the significance of being that particular person in a young person's life. And don't lose the moment to say those words, because they will be remembered forever.
Oh, thank you so much, Pam. And may we all seize our opportunities to play that role with the young people who are in our lives. I want to use that as the mic drop and the final word from our panel, and thank all of our panelists for joining us today. and for challenging us to think differently about how we can best support young people and engage families in that work. As we heard today, there's fantastic work underway that is grounded in science and actionable and within our reach. It was such a powerful closing, Pam. We hope that you've been inspired by what you've heard, and we encourage you to explore the links that have been dropped in the chat, featuring the work of today's panelists and partners and the resources that they have mentioned. Those will also be posted once the webinar itself is online. And with that, we're going to end today's webinar, but we do hope you will join us for the others in the series. Our next webinar will focus on how family engagement can support kindergarten readiness and early school success. So we're going from the Maftunas of the world down to our youngest and earliest learners. It's going to take place on Tuesday, June 27th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And with that, on behalf of Carnegie Corporation of New York, Overdeck Family Foundation, and the U.S. Department of Education, we thank you for joining us and hope to see you next month. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.